Welcome, everyone, to Let's Gigabit podcast. My name is Todd Rawlings. I'm here with my good friend and podcast mate, Mike Farabelli. How are you today, Mike?
I'm feeling really good. The weather here in Seattle is spectacular.
Yeah,
And
the sun has finally come out. Yes.
it's come out with such beauty.
Yeah, and we have a special guest here today, Glenn Fourie. And Mike, do you want to introduce him? And then, Glenn, you can provide any additional details.
Yeah, I first ran into Glenn at our former employer, Microsoft, when we were doing our quality work. And in the meetings and the engagements with Glenn, he really impressed me in the sense that he was responsible for doing advisory in architecture, technology architecture,
Yes.
and security. And some of the architects can stay at 50,000 feet. So what I loved about Glenn knew that architecture is irrelevant if you stay there. So he always focused on a thin layer of, get shit done, if you will.
Yes.
Operationalization and value. He was maniacal about tying architectures and design to value. And he went on to bigger and better things in security and architecture with some well-known ERP firms. And he's intellectually curious. We know about his seamanship curiosity, but he's also a lifelong hopeless architect. So he's studying architecture in the AI world. He's a privileged guest, and I'm sure he'll give us reality sandwiches.
Yeah, this should be really fun. We definitely want to hear more about your journey in the technology and then especially major pivots in your career, but also how AI is influencing how you're working right now, Glenn.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction, Mike. And you always, whenever you hear something like that, you always wonder who they're talking about.
Humble people wonder that.
Yeah, no, it's been a joy, the whole journey, and working with folks like Mike in particular and many others who you always are intrigued to meet people who think in a different way. And that challenges your thinking and it causes you to reassess some assumptions that you made. And those are always good experiences because you come out in a net positive, in my opinion. And sometimes you've got to admit that you're wrong, or you've just got to accept that you know very little about a topic space. And that happened almost every second or third day in the course of my time at Microsoft, certainly, which is what made it fun. I found that tremendously interesting. To your point about career pivots, Todd, I'm a qualified geologist who was born in rural Africa. And how I ended up at Microsoft, I think, was through a sequence of pivots to reassess where I am and what does the market need, because it might not need what you think it does. And just thinking laterally in situations like that, I think has served me really well. And that often required a change of focus or a career pivot, that it's always worked out great. So what that does is it gives you quite a breadth of work scenarios to draw from. And that certainly was the case for me. And I was able to build incrementally on each of those experiences to be able to then tackle some of the current day challenges, whatever they were. And I think AI is obviously one of those, right? AI is a civilization inflection point. It is wonderfully disruptive. It is because of the positive benefits that it has already brought, it continues to bring, and I think we've only scratched the surface. So anyways, I mean, it's obviously very exciting to be alive at this point in humankind's history. And I think the challenge to us all is to be responsible with how we engage with that, and to make sure as few companies get left behind, because I think tragically there are some that are going to get left behind. And it doesn't have to be as bad as what it looks like it may be. And hopefully that's what we can help ensure.
In that regard, Glenn, we want to play off your experiences for this incredible disruption. I remember with the past disruptions, architecture had a real battle. People just wanted to default and go right to design, and that created a lot of technical debt. Now, with AI moving so darn fast, do you have any principles of AI architecture to get us through so we can balance thoughtfulness with time to solution?
Yeah, I think a really good principle, and one that I encountered at Microsoft, and just in really practical terms, and you'll recognize it immediately, was an expression that we would use, which was crawl, walk, run. We found that there were teams that had grandiose ideas and wanted to do big things. And they started to embark on these sort of big bang projects that we used to call them. And the risks just go up exponentially when you tackle something like that, especially with teams that do not have the experience, and sometimes, more often than not, don't have the expertise either. Tragically, human beings have a proclivity towards pride. They think that we think that we're more capable than we are, and we'll figure it out as we go along. That sometimes works. But the point is, it can only take you so far.
But the velocity, Glenn, crawl, walk, run in our day was 18 months.
Yeah.
Crawl, walk, run in the AI world is 4 to 6 months. Any ideas on how to cope with that?
Yeah, I think it's one of the first things that I think leadership should think about is resist the temptation to promise spectacular results in incredibly short timeframes, just because there are people out there that are accomplishing that. And they think that's what is expected from them, from shareholders, right? I think companies that are well established mustn't lose sight of the fact that they're dealing with their own culture. And that culture, unless it's a super innovative culture and they're demonstrating that on a daily basis, they may struggle. I think what's happening is there are many failure modes, and the percentage of AI-oriented projects that fail is trends towards the highest end of the scale. As my brother would often tell me, there's always time to do it right the second time. And so the tragedy of having too many failures in the early stage is interpreted. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but it's often interpreted as this stuff is a load of garbage. This is not worth doing. Hey, we'll just bide our time. And I think that too is an overreaction, and that too, tragically, could make you the victim of future disruption. So I think the right mindset here is to experiment with a small group, of course, fail fast. Create your little SWAT team, however term that you want to use. Choose a logically defined area and go and experiment with that. Fail fast, but at the same time, you know that there's things that you're going to have to be doing. There are teams that are involved with, say, for example, governance functions. What are the emerging regulations and principles? How does privacy change? How does security change? Security materially has to evolve to be able to cater for a world where attackers are AI empowered. They're certainly not going to be resting on their laurels as these great technologies become commonplace. So there's certainly a ton of stuff that should be done, that each department that is involved in those sort of activities can and should be out there doing. But on the technical side, this is where it gets really interesting. And the best philosophy there, the best approach, found an area and go and experiment with that. If you feel like you don't have the in-house expertise, bring in some external expertise, but make sure that you're cross-pollinating, doing the technological transfers and the training so that the teams can start to iterate and build out. Think about doing that in about a 3 to 5 person team. Look for something that will deliver results within 90 days. When I was leading data management for the company, we were hugely at risk for our data management projects to be canceled because people didn't think it was that important. And I developed a little bit of a philosophy, which was the most dangerous thing to a project during my tenure at Microsoft, particularly, was a vice president or an executive standing up in a meeting and saying, remind me why we are doing that again, because there's pressure for
That being data management expense, investment.
fit in the project, but particularly data management, because one, they didn't understand it. And so we had to do a lot to dollar quantify. The cost of bad data management was just a case in point, right? So that we could say, we're doing this because we know that, say in this case, a sales motion has poor data, and the contribution of that is X million dollars. And we're driving a benefit that we anticipate will result in 2 to 3x improvements in revenue.
Now, with AI, you can look at the risk, the counter to just the contribution, the positive side.
Yeah, right.
If you have bad data and you take AI on steroids with independent agents, the potential for harm is exponential in a bad way. So I'm assuming in your security world, things like agent decision making is going to be instrumented much like a knock, where there's triggers. So we're going to go from a kind of a static risk management governance after the fact to real time. Is that your sense, Glenn?
And the knock, for those who are not familiar with the term, the network operating center, absolutely, because as you pointed out, bad agentic actions have an exponential outcome for unexpected behaviors. And having spent some time heading up security operation teams, you know that when you're having a major incident, you don't want to be trying to figure stuff out for the very first time. To the extent that you can, you want to be running a well-rehearsed playbook. And in this case, it is the very ground that you're trying to stand on to find out what the heck is going on is in the process of moving and being changed because of these chain reactions of agentic decisions. So you've got to be very careful to control that. And this comes back to the architecture. One of the key parts of any project going forward that has an AI component in it, and I would argue any component, any project for that matter, has to be much higher levels of instrumentation so that you can get the visibility into things like hallucinating decisions. When do you do and add a human in the loop for review? That has to be designed in, because doing it after the fact is usually very expensive if you can accomplish it at all. So certainly a lot of planning has to go in that. In these little SWAT team projects, I urge people to start to get engaged in. Remember, they are as much a learning activity as much as they're a value improvement activity. And so the nature, the extent, and the mechanics of how to establish those instrumentation systems is very much what the company has to do. It has to kick it up to the next level.
And I got one more question, then I want to turn you over to Todd.
Okay.
I'm dying for you to answer one more, Glenn. And I know Todd's been through this. We've all been through it. If there's a business continuity, like a data center's been hit, or there's been a ransomware attack, every company I've been in hits the decks, high urgency. Everybody is incredibly aligned, and they fix the problem. But then after the event, they go back to their fragmented silos. And I always said, why couldn't we have that alignment and get and solutions focus, business as usual? This is just a hypothesis I have for you, Glenn, and for you, Todd. I believe AI is going to be so fast that we're going to be catapulted mindset-wise. If we were in a hospital, from the baby nursery pace to not shock trauma, but the intensive care unit, 24/7. So one mindset change. I really believe in a year, 18 months, with AI velocity and the penalties of getting it wrong, we're going to have to be intensely aligned, not fragmented, right? And preventive as all can be. Now I'm going to shut up, Todd. I know. going off here, but you, both of you, what do you think? Do you think that's going to happen?
I agree. When we learned so much, Mike, when we would do a Kaizen, a lean event, and everyone would come together. Everyone who, like you say, were in their own silos, and then they come together and they go, "Oh, I didn't know you were the one I was throwing the stuff over the wall to. I didn't know that you did this job. I didn't know." And they get to know each other, and boy, ideas would blossom, things would get solved because people were empowered to make decisions instead of having to run it up every chain. Yeah. So it seems like that those crises, they were the times when you could really get a lot of GSD, as we used to say, get shit done.
Yeah.
But Glenn, did you see that too?
Yeah, I think this is a well-documented issue. And having been the incident commander for major global multinational incidents, it's exactly what happens. I think Patrick Lencioni, author of Five Dysfunctions of a Team, or his book, Silent Politics and War, I think captures it beautifully. And he said he had a consulting engagement at a hospital, and they said, listen, our hospital's not working very well. He was working with the board, and they had what they thought was a higher level of politics and turf wars, etc., than normal. And he said, let me go around the hospital. I'll go check it out. And he reported out 2 weeks later and said, hey, look, you absolutely do. You have a tremendous amount of that going on, but there's one department where you have none of that. And they were very surprised. And they said, what's that? And he said, it's in the ER, because when there's a life on the line, there is a very powerful unifying goal.
Amen.
And I think this is what happens when you go to a security incident. I think with ransomware attacks, it can be so devastating that the front door doesn't even work. And we've seen some tragic examples of that. But to your point, people go back. And I think it's a really powerful mechanism to remind everyone. And Mike, you might remember the meeting that I conducted. I think you barely knew me. I was working on a particular pernicious problem, and I went around the room and I stated the unifying goal. And I looked each person in the eyes and I said, are you prepared to commit to the unifying goal? Because if I see behaviors that are not consistent with that, I'm going to ask you why.
Yeah, I remember that because I had recently done jury duty.
Yeah.
And I was one of the 9 or 11, I think it was 11. We had to individually say guilty or not guilty.
Yeah.
We couldn't hide behind the group.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you forced everybody at the table to go eyeball to eyeball with you, with their decision.
No, and I think you might say, why do we all revert back? And I think you're dealing with just inherent human nature. We have a proclivity, and it's probably evolutionary, if I had to guess, towards basic security. I'm talking human Maslow's level 1 security inclination, and it's protective. And so what we're asking people to do is engage in a unnatural openness and collaborative manner when there is no crisis in front of them, because that crisis starts to impact those natural human proclivities, like a life on the line. And that really is very motivating, very focusing. And I would say there are companies that should honestly take a deep breath, take a hard look, do the research to realize that they are, in some cases, potentially facing existential risks. When that becomes understood, I think you have the potential for that unifying goal. And I think that's when you spin off these smaller SWAT teams, they will get the collaboration, they will get the engagement that they need, because as often is the case, and tragically, and we've all seen this, projects get spun off. There are some in the room who don't want to see those projects succeed, tragically. It's almost an assured waste of money right there. And so they might not be fully cooperative. There are a number of legacy systems, turf wars, there's territorial defense. I think there's a lot of reasons why people engage in those activities. But if leadership can understand the nature of this challenge in this moment, in this season that is facing the company, I don't think it's an overstatement to say it is hugely potentially disruptive. It is going to introduce a dynamic of the competition in a way that I'm not sure we've seen before. And that competition might not be existing competitors. That competition quite likely is a whole new generation of competitors for individuals or a handful of individuals armed with a series of well-designed agentic infrastructure that can do and compete at a completely different price point and a completely different velocity and with a completely different value proposition for their customers. So I do think for some companies, this could well be existential. And I think that could well be that unifying goal.
Yeah, I think we're hearing that from a lot of the leaders. I was listening to Satya Nadella recently talking about that too. He said, look, this isn't just like a new application, people. This is going to change fundamentally how all business is done. And I thought that was really an eye-opener to hear him say it.
Yeah.
And absolutely. Glenn, I want to take us in a slightly different direction, but draw on your database background, because one of the concerns that I have is, sure, we've got the LLMs, they're all trained up on the public knowledge, they've read every book that's out there, every post on the stacks, but they don't have what? They don't have the corporate data. The corporate data is still all behind the firewalls. So how do we, in your mind, you must see that there's going to need to be this sort of coming to terms of merging this data in a logical sense, in a sense that is efficient, right? So do you have any thoughts along that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first question that leadership should be asking themselves is, do we have a handle on the state of our data currently? Bad data, I'm just going to use a general term, has actually proven to be one of the more common failure modes for why AI projects fail. And so AI projects are putting demands on your data quality that hasn't been demanded of that before. And so the follow-on question is, if you can't even answer that question, is what is the current state? Then how do I find out what that is? And my philosophy is simple. What will you find out when you see business processes operating is there's usually a critical few data points, data fields that support that business process. Just using an example, if I have a sales motion, I need to have a salesperson assigned to that sales process to engage with the customer. Say we're talking about renewals of licenses. Let's just use that as an example. Someone's got to pick the phone up and engage the customer and talk to them about a renewal. That's normally tracked in a database. What if that field is blank? So what then happens is that process breaks. And I'm using this example because it's a real world example where we drove tremendous value. Because what does a company need to do in a situation like that? Is this term called data profiling. For the technical types, they'll know exactly what I mean. But it really means running tools over a database to look for data quality issues. Are there missing fields? Are there duplicates? Are there referential integrity issues? Okay, so are there domain data issues? Here's an example. If new zip codes are introduced, what if one database knows about the new zip codes, but the other one doesn't? And the data has to get transferred in there, and it starts to come in with these new zip codes, and that other database doesn't know what to do with them. You've got a transpositional error there, and you're going to have chaos, or you're going to have missing fields. And where I often talk about this, I say your workflow may be steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 10 steps in the workflow. But the moment you have a data failure like that, a new sub-process has to be triggered to go and find the missing data or to go and fix the data. And then you're at step 34 before that particular process can continue to function for that record. So these will get really expensive. What's the solution is start to make sure that for your critical databases and the critical fields and databases that are being directly supported, that are directly supporting your processes, make sure you're doing data profiling on those. If I was CIO for a day, what I would do is I would step back and say, what are my major processes in this company? And I would start with the processes that drive revenue, right? That's where you start. And what I would do is I would profile those databases, especially for those critical data fields, and I'll put that in a scorecard. With time, if I've done that enough, I will have a dashboard that in an instant, I could wake up in the morning, get to my office, turn it on, have a look at my dashboard, and if business leaders are calling me, or I can say, hey, I can assure you that your data is in fine condition to support what you're doing today in your data processes. I think that's a really relatively simple way of understanding what is the state of the data to accomplish the task. Now,
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I'd like to drill just a little deeper if I could. Do you think that AI and database tools could help corporations? Because I'm thinking that, you know what? Let's just say it. 99% of organizations have bad data. I was just thinking about it the other day. I made a call into a support system. They had my old address. How
Right.
long have you had my old address? 5 years.
Yeah.
You've been sending my letters to the wrong address for 5 years. You never updated your address. You can't just put it all on the consumer, right? So I'm thinking that there could be an absolutely huge opportunity here for a corporation who can come in and help other companies clean up their data using AI and agents, right? Can you envision anything like that?
It's already happening. One of the most pernicious areas for companies in this area is customer data management, CDM, right? This very issue that you spoke about, Todd, is actually quite a tricky area. It's a tough nut to crack. And there's a whole science behind how you do that. And there are companies that sell data, and many companies buy those to freshen up their knowledge about things like address information, contact information is some of the most obvious stuff. But then there's also other stuff, other demographics that change. The companies out there that were bragging that they have 1,600, plenty more data points about every economically active person in the country. And some of that is by interpolation, and some of that is real active acquired data.
I want to add something, I think, where Todd was going. What we're talking about here is the age-old problem. If we waved a magic wand and did everything you said, Glenn, the next problem is keeping data current.
Yes.
That's the next one. I think what Todd was getting to, I've seen departments hire data stewards, and then a year later, they're gone at the first budget cut.
Yeah.
You've seen that. Maybe agents are the answer here to keep data current. I think, Todd, maybe that's what you were beginning to dig in.
Yeah, I wondered if, because first of all, that there could be an AI that was super database savvy and look for all of these holes that you were talking
That's
about, Glenn,
first.
all these inconsistencies, duplicate records, same name, different addresses, right? And then there could even be a series of AI agents then that go out and research and help to fix that, even making a call to the party and getting the data fixed so that's not humans having to do that. That's drudgery, right?
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go, right? You know, data accuracy, there are 26 dimensions to data quality. Data accuracy is one of them. AI is going to play, and already is playing a role. Like, for example, those companies that are providing data brokerage services themselves are already using AI to start to freshen up and improve accuracy. Recency, which is like keeping the data current, is another dimension of data quality, and AI is being used in that area. Referential integrity, we just use that where maybe a primary key on one table that should refer to a record in another that doesn't exist. AI can pick up on those, and if AI agents have access to multiple systems within the enterprise, can actually run through and drive automated repair of those. And in fact, some of that has existed already, even in the pre-AI era, but AI is going to kick that off on steroids. I think, do you then go and just do this broadly across the enterprise? I think if you're still in the crawl stage of getting your AI systems operating and doing that first iteration project, You're going to choose your process carefully that you're going to want to go after. You're going to isolate the data, identify your critical data fields that are going to support that, and make sure that you have a handle on your current state of your data. And you can go and run an AI and agentic project on that. Once you reach a certain level of acceptable data quality. And then once you're operating that, you would then, as part of your instrumentation, measuring the state of your data outbound and inbound, and make sure that you've got agents that are improving the quality of your data. But Mike, I want to get to the question that you raised because it's an important one. A data steward sounds like an awfully boring title. It's normally an addition to someone's job. And it's the sort of thing that gets killed pretty darn quick, like you say, Mike. So what we did was, when I took on the scope of data management for Microsoft, I fell into the hole that so many, quote, data governance initiatives, data management initiatives do, where they set up the data governance board, they've got data stewards and data executives, and it just sounds like such a large overhead for a benefit that is very difficult to quantify, or certainly in the average manager's mind, it seems rather tenuous. And long story short, we had challenges because we were driving and forcing decisions that fell into these political silos, and it was very difficult to accomplish. I pivoted the strategy because the velocity of business, even in that era, and it's much faster now, was such that you had to go and solve one business problem at a time. And what we were finding at that time was business leadership says, talking about data and information, man, that's what the IT team should be doing because that's the I in IT. And the IT teams were saying, we can't make business decisions because we don't understand the business rules. Do you want us to make those decisions? And because the question was, who owns this? And the net result is both own it, and it is a joint venture. What we went and did was to go and solve a business problem at a time in a dollar quantified way. And the net result was that business leadership, those with the purse strings, could see the value. They could see line of sight that if I didn't get the data model, if I didn't have the business rules figured out, if I wasn't managing my metadata really well, I see the dollar impacts to my business. And I made a science of making sure that we dollar quantified that, and it actually made the process much easier. And you do that iteratively so that as each business problem gets solved, you are building your enterprise data model as you work on these increments and expand that out, because the logic is there, it is needed, the funding is there, and it builds out in increments. That is the right way to tackle that, especially in high velocity businesses where a lot of this would seem to sound like friction. And
it seems like that type of knowledge too would be just like golden nuggets for a corporate LLM to have. Yeah. So I could see huge opportunities there. I want to go in a different direction here, but Mike, any follow-up questions before we do?
No, go ahead, because I've got a big question at the end.
Oh, okay. All right.
I'll keep you in suspense, Todd.
So this is still about data. I just want to go back. Mike was so supportive of me, even though we were focused on quality and process improvement and so on. I couldn't help myself in the Microsoft environment, but look for opportunities to co-write patents. In every case, it was always co-written because I'm not an engineer, but I could draw knowledge out of their heads, right? And often help them find additional ways to create value, which is also something that Mike has done in his career. Long story short, there was a particular gentleman, his name is Daniel Commons, and I think he's still there at Microsoft, but he had written an application that was very small. It almost went into the kernel of the operating system, and it would inventory everything in a server. So imagine you've got a cloud server in the data center, and you know all the operating system versions, every patch, but it also did all the hardware. So you knew every chip, every NIC card, everything that was in that server. You could take a snapshot and it would put that into a database. And then as things changed, it would keep track of that. And then if something happened to that server, you could go back and look at that history and see. And so what Daniel and I, we did it within Microsoft. And it was a hard road because, of course, the people managing the servers didn't want to put anything foreign like that on their servers because it could potentially crash it. But then they started to see the value in it. And then we started to think to ourselves, what if there was something like this on all the servers everywhere that were Microsoft customers, and we could track not just deltas in configurations, but when a new software patch launched or something like that, if it caused a crash in one server with this type of background, we could proactively notify everyone, don't install this patch because it's already caused some crashes. So I just wanted to give you that background. Can you see where we could use databases and AI in a similar type of fashion in maybe beyond just hardware to anticipate types of risks in the corporate and in our personal lives?
Yeah, absolutely. But I want to point out, Todd, this is a very mature field now. And it was demanded because of, amongst other things, cybersecurity risk. So the whole area of digital asset management is, again, a well-evolved science. And there are tools, there are agents, not in the AI sense, but just agents that are operating independently that go and do that inventorying for you. Vital for a company to build any form of ransomware protection, because you want to be able to find out where you're running through the enterprise, and for these large enterprises, services that could be manipulated to run encryption algorithms by attackers to be able to lock up a company. So that is a very well-advanced science. And again, in each one of these areas, AI is already starting to play a role to accelerate that, to do it with more intelligence, to do it agentically so that it can make that information available and allow other agents to use that information to be able to do orchestrations in an automated fashion to drive things that took days, weeks of instrumentation, say, and run that in minutes.
Yeah, because there's just too many parameters for us to grok. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and another obvious area is some tools that security operations teams use to be able to see events, see traffic, correlate all of that together, and to know and to separate out signal from noise, to know that's attacker behavior versus just normal business operations or technical functions. That is not hostile, but this particular activity is. And again, those things are very well advanced. In the pre-generative AI era, those tools were already using early forms of AI, like machine learning, to become better at what they did and to handle vast amounts of information, to be able to draw conclusions and provide that logic to the humans in the loop to say, hey, I'm seeing a sequence of stuff here. I've got a feeling this is bad. Or what we would do is we would feed in through threat intelligence into the systems to be able to say, look out for these sort of signatures or these originating IP addresses, whatever it was, so that it could be scouring the systems at a near real time, throw alarms that our security team would then jump on and start to action and take whatever actions were needed, shut down a port or whatever it was.
You think that there's still opportunity? I know you said in the larger corporations they have this, but say a small or a medium-sized company, do you think there's still opportunities for businesses to go in and capture that same type of market of providing that knowledge and anticipatory intelligence?
I think there is, but as I hinted earlier, I think in the AI era, you're going to find companies, small companies that had an army of trained, educated, and configured agents to be able to drive a material business value in a niche area that's going to be very disruptive. And I think when someone goes to be purchasing, be it an asset management system or cybersecurity oriented systems, these niche companies are going to come in at a very competitive rate with really high output, high quality results. That's going to be compelling. So these are an example of the disruptive factors that are going to drive through industry.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of some of our audience members who are thinking of different gigs.
Yeah.
That there could be opportunities here. Yeah.
Well, I think there's tons. Yep.
I want to give you enough time to answer or to ask your last question, sir.
Oh, yeah. We've had a great discussion of the architectural environment with data, instrumentation, crawl, walk, run. What I want to do, Glenn, is some Glenn call to action principles in architecture specifically before we conclude this podcast.
Yes.
This is for the architects in the audience. With some Glenn AI principles for the new world.
I think there's clearly work that can be done right now. And I've hinted at some of that. An example would be in the policy, in the governance space, et cetera. So you've really got those teams. You've got to make sure that those teams are staying abreast of, anticipating, and are driving the upcoming changes as things like legislation are starting to land in different parts of the world. I think one of the more obvious areas is things like engaging in these SWAT teams and experimenting with the technologies and making sure that you're learning, or your teams are learning and building the knowledge on how to do elements like this. Another one is making sure that those activities bake in safety and governance from the start. And the implication, of course, there is also instrumentation, and you've heard me talk about. I think start to move the company at a high level to an event-first backbone, to understand that you're going to go from synchronous engagement with systems to asynchronous, which means you set a job off and it goes off and does its own thing. So there are technical components that need to get built in to do that. A lot of that stems from early stage activities. One of them is having a keen understanding of the various business capabilities, where they are structured, and then start to think about how you might bound each of those business capabilities into a PPTI, a person, process, technology, information stack. Because in the future state architecture, you're going to want to make those self-contained services that can interact with an AI system. So I think there are technical elements, as I mentioned, but there are certainly high-level management elements as well. And then ultimately provide the teams at the forefront of this the latitude, the support. The executive one-liner call to action is to modernize. You modernize your company domain by domain. Start to think about your platform, build that governance in, and then evolve continuously.
I've been evangelizing a strategy I call T for transformation. It's very similar, which you just enunciated. There's a just do it to AI, to get out of neutral gear, for God's sake. And the just do it is what you talked about: governance, process, ethics, AI center of excellence that promotes standards. And then you're very thoughtful about where you deploy and satisfy use cases for workflow re-engineering, and that informs architectural design. Yeah, well, I guess great minds think alike, Glenn. We're thinking very similarly. So the horizontal part of the T is just do it. The vertical part is be very thoughtful about where you deploy and how you deploy.
And then a question a lot of people have is, architecture historically has been friction, right? The gatekeepers. And so architectural function itself has to evolve from this gatekeeper mentality to an enabler. And if necessary, embed architects in these core teams as you start going to be able to accelerate. It's all about velocity, and they're enablers. There might be some guardrails, which is a term that architects would use a lot, but very few out and out blueprint patterns on how these things all have to operate.
Yeah, that's mindset for architects. Todd and I, when we were doing process engineering,
Yeah.
there used to be a joke about the difference between a terrorist and, for example, a Six Sigma practitioner. And the answer was you could negotiate with the terrorists. And I think, Todd, remember those days? I think that's what you're saying about architecture. It's got,
Right.
the mindset's got to be, get the sensors out and listen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But I love that concept of embedding, because
Yes.
that kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, where, it's really about teams and getting people together who haven't worked perhaps together before. And now they see the architect, as you say, as an enabler, not a wall that they throw things over. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, very much. And in fact, the metamorphosis, the change that is happening is you're going to see business and technical teams and data teams all forming part of one small AI-oriented business capability that operates as a whole. So suddenly, business people are going to meet the technical teams that have been supporting them in a much different way as co-equal partners around the table, and the data that they own is going to come to that place too. And they're going to have responsibility for their own destiny. I was always amazed that where people didn't seem to care about the destruction of the data quality because they were laissez-faire about it. And it was like someone else is going to fix that. Now it's going to be far more visceral, far more visible because of the instrumentation. And it's going to be, they're going to have to sleep in the bed that they make. And I think those are all good things going forward.
Yeah. Very good. All right, gentlemen. I thought this was fantastic. We covered a lot of ground, and I think it's going to be very valuable to everyone. And we'll monitor the comments that we get from our guests, and we'll respond to as many of the questions that come across as possible. So thank you both for your time today, Glenn. I hope to see you out on your boat here this summer in the Puget Sound. And enjoy the wonderful weather. All right, gentlemen.
Cheers.
Thank you, Todd.
Have a great
Thank you,
weekend.
Glenn.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, you guys. If you've made it to the end, we thank you, and we consider you guys all Let's Gigabit podcast mates. So in the show notes, we will have some links for you, and we ask that if you like these episodes, please subscribe, and we will see you next time. Bye now.